This was a rough one, y'all. It took me a long time to set up the lighting here, and I know what the problem is. The problem is I'm recording on a webcam, and that's stupid. I wish we could skip right to the end. Hi, my name is Dami. I'm a writer, and today we're going to talk a little bit about what encouraged me to write, or books that encouraged me to write, or inspired me to become a writer. Also going to, at the very end of this video, talk a little bit about books that have just kind of tickled my brain recently in all the right ways. Books I've read recently that I've liked, because I have not read enough books in the last couple of months to make a full video out of that. Bye, Willow. So we're gonna tack it on the end of this video. I came up with the idea for this video because I've recently started getting into books again, and that is reading physical books. Over the last year or so, I've been doing more audiobooks just because I have stuff to do, and it's hard to find the time to just read a book and do nothing else. I need to do laundry or make dinner or what have you. Audiobooks give me the chance or the opportunity to continue reading and be immersed in a universe while getting something else done. But the last couple of months, 2-ish months or so, I've been getting back into physical books again. And the immersion is just like nothing else when you're reading a physical book. Because with the audiobooks, I'm generally doing something else. I'd read the physical book unless I have to do something else at the same time, right? And so I will listen to audiobook while driving, or I'm listening to audiobook while maybe making dinner, or I'm listening to audiobook while doing laundry or something. The immersion is there, but not quite, because I'm still somewhat attentive to whatever it is that's going on around me. But when you sit down and you're doing nothing except for reading the book, and it's just the pages, or just the words on the pages, and if you're somebody who can I can't speak to people who don't necessarily visualize when they're reading or anything like that, but I'm someone who does visualize when they're reading. But when you're sitting down reading a physical book and visualizing what you're seeing on the page, it's so immersive, and I miss that. I miss that a lot, and in the end, it was that feeling that encouraged me to be a writer. It was that feeling when I was a kid, experiencing that sort of immersion where you look down, look up, and suddenly 4 hours have passed. Being completely lost and completely enraptured by a different universe and a different world, and forgetting that I exist in this plane of existence, essentially. When I was younger, the ability for a book to do that to me was very magical. It's a very romanticized way of thinking about it, but it really did feel like that to me as a kid. It just felt like magic, reading a book and forgetting where I was and what time it was and what my name is. I think for a lot of kids, what inspires them to do something is seeing somebody else do it first, and that's why what's the word I'm looking for? Representation! That's why representation is so important, because what inspires kids is you have to see it first. When I was younger and I'd read a book that I'd been so immersed in, I didn't have this vocabulary at the time, but I had a book hangover, right? And you're just wow, how can I read something just like that but totally different? As a kiddo, I would just reread the same book over and over and over and over again. And so a lot of the books I'm going to talk about today are books that I reread I say dozens, maybe that's an exaggeration, but at least a dozen times. Maybe the thicker books that I'll talk about, maybe just 6 or 7 times. I would, be in my bedroom with the lamp on, reading until the wee hours of the night. Parents had to make sure I didn't have books with me, so I would go to sleep. I would hide in the bathroom and read in peace there. It was just gross because there's so many poop particles on your books, but I didn't care. I was 7. I would stay in the bathroom for hours reading a book, and then I'd hear my parents "Where's Dammy?" And I'd be "Oh, what do you mean?" There were always books in the bathroom, and I try not to do that now because I don't want poop particles on my books. But that's what really encouraged me to write, was wanting to be immersed in a world, and I just thought that was incredible. So, without further ado, I think that was 20 minutes of me rambling. Don't worry, I'll cut it down into 5 tops. Let's do this. The first book I'm going to talk about is Artemis, Fowl, and the Wish List by Eoin Colfer. Here's the Wish List. The Wish List by Eoin Colfer, and the Artemis Fowl series. I have read all of them, but as a kid, I think, and by kid I mean middle school-ish years, middle school to high school years, I think maybe only the first 5 or so were out. This one, which one is this one? The Lost Colony. I remember this is where the books, I started to become less interested in them. But I don't remember if it's because, were the books quality-wise, not as good, or I just wasn't into them as much, or was it more that I was outgrowing the genre by the time these books were coming out? I think it might, frankly, be the latter. The Wish List by Eoin Colfer is a fantasy novel by Irish writer Eoin Colfer. It chronicles the adventures of Meg Finn, a teenage girl killed in a gas explosion who must earn her place in heaven by returning to Earth to help a pensioner she attempted to rob. So to help essentially an older gentleman who she and her friend attempted to rob. So she dies and is sent back to Earth to help the guy that she kind of screwed over. And Artemis Fowl is a series of 11. 11? Okay. Artemis Fowl is a series of 11 fantasy novels written by Eoin Colfer, revolving around various members of the Fowl family. The first novel follows Elf Lower Elements Police Reconnaissance, the leprechaun officer Holly Short, as she faces the forces of the criminal mastermind Artemis Fowl. Later on in the cycle, the adversaries are forced to work together, gradually becoming firm friends / brief love interests while saving the world. And apparently there's a second cycle called The Fowl Twins, which I did not read. But it did receive apparently positive critical reception and generated huge sales. Middle grade is a category that I don't want to say forever, but it does intimidate me because writing for middle grade is hard. Those middle grade years, right? Like, you think you know best. Everyone, though, is telling you what to do. No one is taking you seriously. You don't know what you're doing because you're 11. You're learning more about yourself and the world around you, and you also want to fit in, but you also want to kind of be a little bit different, and no one takes you seriously, and everyone's telling you where to go, what to do, what to eat, and it's annoying, right? It's so annoying. But with middle grade, like, to write it, that's the group of people you're trying to cater to. So you have to write this book in a way where you're not talking down to them. They don't feel like you're belittling them or making them feel small or talking to them like they're a kid, even though they're kids. They don't want you to talk to them like that. They want to feel like they're grown up, like not grown ups, but they want to feel mature. I think that's just so challenging to do, because how do you write something that's witty, comical, funny, without being like belittling, without sounding like too immature? And I think the best middle grade books are also appealing to like high schoolers, right? To young adults, like not young adults, the genre, but like young adults. But I think back on my middle grade years as that's when that love of reading and love of writing really developed. And with the wish list at Artemis Fowl, Eoin Colfer does a fantastic job with being witty, being comical, and engaging the reader. With Artemis Fowl, that's essentially urban fantasy. And what's interesting too about the Artemis Fowl series is that he flip-flops within the series between like high fantasy and urban fantasy, like depending on which book, and sometimes even like parts of the book that you're reading. Sometimes they're kind of above ground where it would be more like urban fantasy, and sometimes they go down to the lower, like below ground where all like the fairies and the gnomes and all the other like fantastical creatures live, and so it feels more like high fantasy there, and so that's a lot of fun. And I don't think as a kid I'd read like a lot of urban fantasy or that sort of really like somehow really meshed well, but also very cleanly delineated high fantasy and urban fantasy in the same book or same series of books. So I think that was also just very unique as a middle grader. So reading a book like Artemis Fowl about like a criminal mastermind when you're 12, 13 years old, you're just like, ooh, he's so smart. And it's really fun to read. And I remember too I remember this so vividly in the wish list. Meg, the main character, the teenager, dies. And this is not a spoiler, she dies in the first 2 chapters. Because they have to go back to heaven, right? But she dies. And Peter at the pearly gates is like checking to see like, you know, how many good deeds and bad deeds have you done, and he's like so snarky and clearly like low-key over his job. I think that's the first time I read that sort of dynamic with like Saint or Peter being like, okay, well, who's next, blah blah blah. I think with like Beelzebub is featured in the wish list as well. And they're all like very snarky, and as a kid it was just really fun to read because I hadn't really like conceptualized these people like that before. I love that. It's about thinking about things differently, thinking about things in a different light, in a different way, and I found that very interesting as a kiddo. So that's Eoin Colfer's books, middle grade, and that's what really kind of initially like kind of jump-started my interest in. I want to do that. And I think I remember even as a kid, writing, like I didn't even understand like I didn't have the vocabulary for it then, but I'm pretty sure I wrote essentially fan fiction for Artemis Fowl when I was younger, and I really wanted to emulate something I liked as a writer. I would usually like gender swap stuff, right? And so I would try and write the first chapters of like a new Artemis Fowl series, but this time it was featuring like a girl. But I remember like writing some sort of story about like a girl criminal mastermind or something. Next series I want to talk about is Eragon. Eragon tells the story of a farm boy named Eragon who finds a mysterious stone in the mountains. The stone is revealed to be a dragon egg, and a dragon he later named Saphira hatches from it. When the evil king Galbatorix, is that how you pronounce Galbatorix or Galbatorix? I'm going to call it Galbatorix, I'm sorry. When the evil King Galbatorix finds out about the egg, he sends monstrous servants to acquire it, making Eragon and Saphira flee from their hometown with a storyteller named Brom. Brom, an old member of an extinct group of dragon riders, teaches Eragon about the ways of the rider. Here it is, Eragon. This is a newer copy. I do have the very first copy of Eragon I ever bought. I do have it still. It's at home again with my parentals. It's a mess. I think it's paperback. These pages are like all folded up because it got moved around in storage. Like we've moved like 4 or 5 times since I first bought the book. And so it's been all over the place. And so it's a very messy copy. And so I bought a new copy for, if I do want to read it again, I'll read it from the new copy because the old copy is hanging on not even by the spine anymore, like just by threads. So I read Eragon before I read Lord of the Rings, right? I read Eragon when I was in middle school, and so I had not read Lord of the Rings. I'd never seen Star Wars.
Go see a Star Wars.
Not watch Star Wars until I was like in college. Like our family, we didn't watch Star Wars, so I never grew up with Star Wars, right? And I wasn't allowed to read Harry Potter because witchcraft. Yep, we were one of those. My sister and I, we convinced our parents that it was cool. They've watched all the movies. My mom got super into Harry Potter as well. I ended up watching the last couple of movies like at midnight when they premiered and dressing up and stuff. It was super exciting. And then of course, JK's the worst, so never mind. My point in all of that is Eragon was my very first high fantasy dive. That was my very first introduction to high fantasy, and I loved it as a middle grader, as a middle grade to early high school kid. I thought it was amazing. I was like, wow, like this. And of course, I think Christopher Paolini, I think he started the series or started the books when he was like 16 or something. Yeah, he started writing Eragon when he was 15 years old. I think it ended up becoming self-published by the time he was 19, and then of course Knopf picked it up eventually. I don't remember the timeline, but it doesn't matter. But he started writing it when he was very, very young, when he was 15. I absolutely loved this series because it was like sword fighting and dragons and wizards and the mentor-mentee relationship. Again, this for me at age 12 is just super novel. Like this mentor-mentee relationship. I'd never seen it before because again, I did not grow up with Star Wars, so I hadn't seen like that sort of dynamic before. The fact that Christopher Paolini wrote this when he was 15 years old was inspiring to me. That low-key also fed into the there's no time, like I have to quickly do everything, and my kind of like hustle mentality a little bit, which I'm trying to unlearn. But seeing like, oh, a 15-year-old can come up with this stuff, that's so cool. That means I can do it too. And I think that's kind of what encouraged me to even write, period. Like I can also write stories, and they were very derivative and not good for publishing until very recently. But that was also just very encouraging to me, like to see like a kid writer. A lot of people will say, like, when they go back and reread these books, they're very derivative. The Lord of the Rings is like just heavily inspired by that universe. Like the story is heavily inspired by popular archetypal elements of like the quest fantasy novel type, right? Like the unique sword, the revenge plot, the mentor-mentee relationship with the mentor dying pretty early on, and like very recognizable like fantasy elements and conventions. For a 15-year-old boy, I feel like it's impressive. I have not reread this series since like high school. And I've gone back, just kind of flip through the pages of Eragon. And like the writing is not horrendous. It's not like super terrible. I'd have to go back and kind of see like how things go in terms of like plot beats and devices and stuff like that to reread it. And that could be really fun to do. And I will say too, I did not read, I have it too, and I've tried to read it so many times, but Brazinger, which is the 4th book, because I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be a trilogy, but then the 3rd book ended up being too big, and so we split it in half to Inheritance and Brazinger. No, don't get distracted. No, I'm gonna get distracted. Wasn't Jeremy Irons Brom like in the horrendous movie? Also, the fact that the boy Eragon was in You, like the latest season, is that season 3 or 4? I can't remember. It's hard to keep up. What? Like, wow, that was really fun. I did not realize it was the Eragon kid until I think I saw a TikTok or something, and that was pointed out, and I was like, say what? But anyway, seeing a book that was very high fantasy, very intricate world building, whether or not it was like heavily influenced or just derivative from a lot of different like pieces of literature that are already out there and existing. Me, 12 years old, reading this book, who hadn't read all that stuff already, mind blown. Next book, I do own this book, but it's with the parentals. I don't have it, so I will pop it up somewhere, like either there, probably right here. Boop, that's where I'm gonna pop it. Holes by Louis Sachar. Louis Sachar. Sheesh. Holes is a 1998 young adult novel. The book centers on Stanley Yelnats, who is sent to Camp Green Lake, a correctional boot camp in a desert in Texas, after being falsely accused of theft. The plot explores the history of the area and how the actions of several characters in the past have affected Stanley's life in the present. These interconnecting stories teach on themes such as labor, boyhood and masculinity, friendship, meaning of names, illiteracy, and elements of fairy tales. This is a really special one, and another one that really, encouraged me to write. Before I get into why, fantastic movie adaptation. I'm sure all, many people have seen it. If you have not seen the Holes movie, get out, exit out of this, go find it and watch it and come back.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa!
That's too damn bad!
That movie is fantastic, does a great job. Everyone's fantastic. Sigourney Weaver, Jon Voight is so Once upon a time.
There was a magical place where it never rained.
The end. Dig it out, dig it out, Very defining moment in a lot of our childhood. But why did I like this as a reader and as a future writer? Louis Sachar says that he wrote this book with the intention that people who are older than the middle grade, it's considered young adult. Yeah, it's a considered young adult novel, but he wanted it to be accessible to middle graders, which I think is mad impressive. And it is, it totally is. The mystery aspect of the foreshadowing, the bringing in the past, the present, the future. Man, I remember when Stanley and Zero are in that hole and the yellow spotted lizards show up and they don't get bitten, and it's because of the onions that they ate on the mountain. And I'm just oh my gosh. I remember my mind blowing up, reading this book. And I reread it so many times because with a good mystery, suspenseful plot like that, when you go back and read it, you catch things. Different revelations throughout the book, perfectly timed. And that aspect particularly, the perfectly timed revelations, was something I was I want to be able to do that when I write. And I thought it was just magic, the way that he was able to plan it out like that. To me, it's almost like cooking, brewing a potion of something and knowing when to add each ingredient. And one of the few movie adaptations that killed it. I won't go as far as to say that it's better than the book, but I think it was just so close to the book that it was perfect. The book was perfect. Another thing that I find interesting too is Holes tackles a lot of very complex, difficult topics. Childhood labor, masculinity, boyhood, illiteracy. These are hard topics. These are kids who are sent to camp who are bad kids sent to camp to do hard manual labor. Scared straight, sort of programs where our kid was bad, so we sent them to this camp where they hike uphill twice a day and he came back good. But kids die from these camps. These are dangerous. You're making kids do hard labor. These are not soft topics. And he still talks about them, and he is saying something about them. Is this effective? Or exploiting kids, saying it's for the good of the kids to get better so they can find all this treasure. And sure, that's very direct, very clear, clearly defined villain and that sort of thing. But let's not play games. We are going around exploiting kids all the time. That is the world's MO, is just exploiting people who can't defend themselves. And that's exactly what happens with this book. And he addresses it, and I think in part that's probably why it's considered young adult, not middle grade. But it's accessible to middle graders who can read it and appreciate it for the mystery aspect and the fun aspect and the interesting and the tee-hee, and we got the bad villain. The young adults can can enjoy it for the storytelling aspects of it. And then as you mature, you can kind of understand the commentary that Louis Sachar is making on society as well. And I feel Holes as a story kind of grew with me in that respect, where I want to be able to be accessible in this really fun hee ha ha sort of way, but also making commentary on something that matters. I wonder sometimes, did he get some sort of pushback with that, with the topic at hand that he was discussing? Was it kind of considered this is a little bit much, a little bit taboo? Because I think nowadays we're a little bit more vocal about how these scared straight programs are can be dangerous, and conversion camps are bad, and things like that. 20, 30 years ago, people weren't necessarily talking about it, right? I say this too because the second book that I'm working on, The Sun Has a Shadow, that I'm working on with my agent, it is about addiction, and it's about depression, but it's also about dragons and phoenixes and saving the world. I guess these sound more like adult topics. And when I was querying this novel, some of the rejections that I did receive, and not a lot, only maybe one to three. I think it's either 2 or 3 rejections specifically mentioned there was too much of a mention of substance use. I don't think this topic is appropriate, or this topic is good for young adult. And I remember being so confused because as a psychiatrist, I've worked at a substance use treatment facility specifically for children only. I have learned things about substance use in like the teenage population that low-key terrifies me. And I don't just mean like they're smoking a bit of the ganja, which is, you know, not ideal, but like, forget hooked on phonics. Like, kids are hooked on, and not all of them, obviously. Anyone who tells me like kids aren't really doing, what? And like, and I think too, sometimes when people want to talk about like kids, like, well, the bad kids are doing it, or in like the bad neighborhoods or the rough neighborhoods. I mean, yeah, that's happening there too, but like, it's in your neighborhood, Karen. Anyway, I think about my book and the feedback I got, and wondering if Louis Sachar also got that sort of feedback when he was trying to get this book published. And I think a story that talks about addiction without shaming is important. I think we should write about heavy topics for kids. Okay, we should write about heavy topics for kids, because again, that representation is important, because if they can see it, they know it's not just them, that someone is writing about this. This can't just be me. This can't just be my little circle of friends. This can't just be an isolated incident that I'm experiencing. That sort of representation is important, because that means they now have vocabulary. They now have words to talk about with somebody else, and hopefully they can now use the vocabulary to talk about it with somebody who can help. I feel very passionately about talking about hard subjects, taboo, whatever subjects that we consider for young adults and young adult books. A lot of the books I've talked about so far, these are like young adult, middle grade books that kind of inspired me to write my own stories. I then went to college. I studied English with a creative writing specialization in college. So I did a lot of writing there, mostly short stories. And then I went to medical school for 4 years. And then I did residency for the 4 years. So there was this 8-year period of time where I was not writing. Nowadays, because I've been out of residency for 2 years now, started reading again, started writing again. Now, these next couple of books are more books that I read as an adult that rekindled that love. These are stories that kind of got me back into writing. Like, I read them like in either medical school or residency, that sort of thing. And the first one I'm going to talk about is Six of Crows, so the Six of Crows duology. Six of Crows is a fantasy novel written by Leigh Bardugo. The story follows a thieving crew and is primarily set in the city of Ketterdam. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Which is loosely inspired by Dutch Republic era Amsterdam. The plot is told from third-person viewpoints of 8 different characters. This is the copy that I read. I want to say I read it in 2019, 2020. And I know I can remember specifically when I read it because I read it and saw Read with Cindy's review. It was one of her very first videos, so this must have been like 2019, 2020 time. I loved Six of Crows so much that I purchased collector's edition. Now, I don't usually do this, but I purchased a collector's edition of Six of Crows. And the same thing, which is, check it, gorgeous, stunning, XO Gossip Girl, like, boom, boom. And I did not read Shadow and Bone. Watched the series, or the Netflix series, and the Shadow and Bone plotline was my least favorite part of the series. I was just like, where's Kaz? Like, I was like, where are the crows? And so I was so peeved when they didn't renew that nonsense. But anyway, generally speaking, most people are very particular about their multi-POV stories. I'm actually like a trash compactor for multi-POV. Like, people generally don't like it because you end up having a favorite POV, and so when you switch over to somebody else, you're just like, ugh, this person, and it's like annoying, which I think is totally valid. I acknowledge that I think I'm a little bit of an outlier here, which is that no matter what, even if I don't like that POV or that person very much, or that character, or even if I'm not as interested in that character at all, I still like it because I get to see the characters I am interested in, usually in a different light. It's like a different perspective. So even if I don't like the POV and their opinions and their thoughts, and if they die or not, like, I don't even care about the character, I'm still seeing the characters I like from their perspective, and I think having that sort of insight is like fun. So as a result, my threshold for multi-POV stories is pretty low. I don't care if it's multi-POV, like, I'm down, I'm game. I think that Leigh Bardugo does a great job with multi-POV, at least in this series. All of the characters, they're all very interesting. I'm sure some people, have favorites and that sort of thing, but I enjoyed every single character's perspective, and again, like I said, I'm a trash compactor, low threshold. I was probably going to enjoy it no matter what. As long as the writing's good. I'm more of a sucker for writing. I'm very particular about the writing style. It doesn't mean lyrical. I just need it to be written well, okay? We love grammar. Like, I just need it to be written well. Not only am I a fan of multi-POV, but I'm also just a fan of large casts. Like, everyone has to contribute something to the story, to the plot, to the dynamic, And I love seeing how characters play off of each other. I love seeing what other characters think about somebody else. I think the reason I enjoy it is because that's how the world works. You know, we are side characters in someone else's story. Like, I am the main character of my story, true, but I'm the side character in someone else's story. And even if I have a very passing sort of relationship with somebody, whether that's just like at the grocery store or like a friendship that, you know, comes and goes, and even if there was never any like tension or anything like that, but even just like friendships that just come and go, interactions that just come and go, you are a side character in someone else's story. What sort of impact did you make on them? And that doesn't necessarily mean like really strong like friendships all the time, but just we are impacting everybody around us every time we interact with them. We are impacting the type of day that they have, the type of experience that they have. In every interaction we have, we are affecting somebody. And I think large cast stories really highlight that. You can see how the decisions and the conversations impact somebody else. And I think that just very much emulates the real world very well. And so I that's one of the reasons I love POV large cast. So I was probably gonna like Six of Crows no matter what. And then on top of that, Leigh Bardugo is a fantastic writer. There's some of her books, for example, was it Ninth House? No, yeah, Ninth House. I remember reading it. I wasn't the biggest fan of like the writing style. I could see how other people might like it. Maybe it just wasn't for me. But she's a great writer. I think that's something you can't like take away from her, even if it's not your like cup of tea. She's a good writer. And so getting back into this was fantastic as a resident, and I think especially as a psychiatry resident, again, that sort of we are impacting people every time we interact with them, we are impacting their lives in some way. Recently, I've noticed in stories that are multi POV that the one chapter will be like, I don't know, Vanessa, like Vanessa's POV, and then the next chapter is Conrad's POV, but Conrad's POV is essentially the same scene as Vanessa's, but in a different point of view. I don't like that. I think that's lazy. If you're just gonna write the same scene from another person's point of view, I don't like that. And I'm sure there's times where it's done well. Maybe it's done in Six of Crows, I don't even remember it. But like, there's times where it's done well. I'm sure there are. I can't think of any on the top of my head right now, but I don't like POV like that. Next story, Scythe. And this is Thunderhead. I actually have the full series, but this is the first 2 books. Scythe is a 2016 YA novel by Neal Shusterman. It's the first in the Arc of a Scythe series, set in the far future where death, disease, and unhappiness have been virtually eliminated thanks to advances in technology and a benevolent AI known as the Thunderhead peacefully governs a united Earth. The notable exception to the Thunderhead's rule is the Scythedom, a group of humans whose sole purpose is to replicate mortal death in order to keep the population growth in check. It got me back into science fiction dystopian again. Publishing swears that we're not interested in dystopia. We are so interested in dystopia. Like, we're so interested in dystopia. Bring it back, okay? I don't see myself writing it, just because, frankly, I don't think I'm that creative to come up with really novel dystopian worlds. Bring back dystopia, okay? The people want it. The people want dystopian back, okay? Suzanne Collins came back to give us the Ballad of Songbirds or whatever, which I actually really enjoyed. She heard our cry and gave us the Songbird ballad, songs, whatever book it is, and she gave it to us. And they made a movie, okay? And it did great, I think. Clearly, we are hankering for some more dystopia. Please, but publishing is like, the people don't want it. Yes, we do. Scythe was just another kind of like dystopia sort of story. It was just fun to get back into that sort of world again. Somehow I feel almost nostalgic for it, even though I read it only recently. I might feel nostalgic for it because I'm nostalgic really for dystopia, for dystopian books. So now what I want to talk about is books that I've read recently. So very recently, as in the last 3 months. So books I've read this year in 2024 that just like really tickled my brain right. Because I don't think I've read enough to really go off about these for like a full video. So I'm going to tackle on here. When were y'all going to tell me about this? No. Look, pay attention. Put down the laundry right now. Pay attention. Yes, you. When were y'all going to tell me about this? It was on like super discounted like Audible. Like I got all 3 for 1 credit or some nonsense. I don't know. But I was like, I wanted to read some good like romance I wanted to read some romantasy. I was in the mood for romantasy. I want a fantasy plot, but I want like to feel like the feels and the butterflies in my tummy a little bit. And this book was like 1 credit, 3 books. I was like, say less. Got the first one, hooked within the first couple of chapters. This is the grumpy, my favorite, and people make videos about like the tropification of books. I don't think it's great, like the tropification of books. I understand why it's done from a marketing publishing perspective. I think it's also like low-key annoying, but tropes that I like, grumpy sunshine. This was like a fantastic Mr. Grumps and we can like, and I can do it like sort of vibes. I'm a mood reader. This is what I was in the mood for. And it was like, also we got like the mentor mentee relationship, and the mentor was the grumpy one. Mwah! Oh my gosh, I love it. Chef's kiss. And slow burn, perfect. Like, serve it to me with good writing and great world building and excellent tone. I said, chef, cook me something. He cooked, I ate. It was so good. It was well written. I've read like some critiques about world building, which I do agree on. That being said, I give it 5 stars because that's what I wanted to read, and I got to read it. I very much enjoyed it. I wonder if I went back and would rate it back in time, read it like more critically, to be honest, maybe I'd give it more of like 4 out of 5 stars. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. If you go back to read my review of it too, it's foolish. It's something like, this is what I asked for and this is what was delivered. Say less. The reason I write, and this goes, see, look at me tying it all back in, going full circle. The reason I write is because when I read as a kid, I was so immersed in a universe that I forgot where I was. And I thought that was magic. And when it's done to me, I'm happy. And it's harder to do the older you get because you become more mature and you become a little bit more discerning, and what kind of passed before isn't going to pass again in the future. But if I am put into a universe so thoroughly, and like I look up and I forget what I'm doing, you did it for me. Like, you're getting 5 stars. Like, if I am reading a book and I look up and I'm shocked at the time, you get 5 stars. I want to be immersed. Like, I just want to be immersed. And what that means for everybody, I think, is different, right? And it's subjective. But I know the feeling of being immersed. I may be able to go back and I can critique and say like, okay, like this could have been done better. This could have been done this way. If this was done, maybe I would have been like even more immersed. I can recognize like where I was taken out of the story a little bit and where that immersion was broken. If throughout my reading experience, I don't want to go to bed, or I want to keep reading until it's super late, or I really like, because that's more than I need to know what happens next. If I really need to know what happens next, I'll like skim. I'll take a peek at the next chapter, right? If I just want to know what happens next. But for me to be like, I need to know what happens next, and I need to know how, that's immersion. This book did it for me last month, okay? This series did it for me this last month. I was immersed, I was content. That's that. I've rambled enough about that. The next book that I read was Forest of Dreams and Whispers. Well, Reads with Rachel. I think she was talking about Cruel Prince, and she did not like Cruel Prince as much. I don't remember what she rated it. But in the video, she says, if you want good banter and like grumpy or enemies to lovers or whatever, she goes, read this book. They hate each other. It's a delight. And I paused the video, found the book, and bought it. Like, it's a fairy tale retelling of Sleeping Beauty, but gender swapped. So Sleeping Beauty is the male character, and the female character is the one who rescues the male character, right? So I've never read anything by Katherine MacDonald before, so that's the other thing. And I don't usually read fairy tale retellings, but I read it because of Reads with Rachel's recommendation, and I was in the mood for that sort of banter. Like, I love banter so much. And what was great about this book, though, because it wasn't quite the banter I was expecting, it understood the source material, and the source material is fairy tale story, right? So fantastical, whimsical. I wouldn't go as far as to call the prose lyrical, to be quite honest. I would call it like maybe more whimsical. As a result, it can kind of get away with like being more camp, because I think the banter at times is a little campy, but I liked it. I liked it a lot, and I think it worked very well for the genre. Like, she understood the source material and she understood her assignment. If this sort of dialogue was written in, say, like ACOTAR, for example, which I felt like ACOTAR, the first one was okay. I felt like the first book was okay. But if this sort of banter was in ACOTAR, I'd probably hate it. I can see why people would not like this book, for example, though. I could see why people would read this and be like, ew, or not like the banter, or find it annoying. I can very much understand that. But I think it works for the genre very, very well. This feels like fairy tale. And so I think Katherine MacDonald gets away with some of the decisions with the banter and like the word choice and all this type of stuff. And it's campy and it's wonderful. So I like that. Now, on my TBR is Rhythm of War. So Brandon Sanderson. Sanderson is great because he writes such accessible books. People, I think, who are like scared to read Lord of the Rings because, you know, Lord of the Rings is fantastic. People who are kind of scared to read Lord of the Rings because he spends like 3 pages talking about a tree, valid. Sanderson, so accessible. He's good at what he does and he's efficient at what he does. And I say that as, even though all of his books are like 1,000 pages each. Funny story with Sanderson for me personally is that I have read The Way of Kings 4 times because I will read The Way of Kings as the first book in the Starlight Archives. And then I'll start the second one, which is Words of Radiance, and then get halfway through before I peter out or life gets busy or I stop reading or I get distracted or whatever. And then I forget everything that happened. Plot comes in, plot comes out. So this keeps happening. So I've read The Way of Kings like 4 times. I read Words of Radiance, I think 2 or 3 times. And then Oathbringer I've read 1.5 times. So I finally finished Oathbringer. And very recently, a couple months ago, like 3-ish months ago, I finished Oathbringer, but I read Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, and then Oathbringer all in a row, because I was like, I'm not going to do this, because I know the 5th book comes out at the end of the year, I think it's December. I'm going to finish these books before that happens, so now I only have one left, and it's Rhythm of War, and I think because I was, like, actively talking about the books, like, with my husband, like, as I was reading it, I think the plot is a little bit more stuck in my head, and I remember exactly where I left off. I did start Rhythm of War, but I was like, I want to read something else. I kind of got distracted. I was like, I want to read something else. I need, like, a palate cleanser in a sense, and that's how I got into Daughter of No World, and then Forest of Dreams and Whispers. That is all I have for today. That was very long-winded. It took me like an hour to set this all up, and basically I did not even change the setup that I usually have, because the lighting, I'm recording this at a time I don't usually record. I usually record like a little bit earlier in the morning, like before noon, and it's, what time is it? It's almost 3:45, so I think I've been recording for like an hour and 15 minutes. Oops. But so it's a little bit later in the day, so the sun's moved, and I'm like, wasn't used to it. Also, like I said before, I'm recording on a webcam because I'm a derp, and I need a camera. But yeah, so that's all I have for today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. I hope you found this mildly interesting or entertaining. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. If there's anything you want me to talk about next time or in the future, let me know. Otherwise, I'll keep making videos on whatever I want to make videos on. And maybe I'll get a new camera.
I wish we could skip right to the end.